Hi, welcome to the introductory video for a series of videos on how we can play better Blitz. I'm Phil Crocker. I guess we can start off by asking, why should you listen to what I've got to say? Well, I would argue that there are two main ways in which you can be good at Blitz. Firstly, you can just be generally good at chess. And secondly, you can be young in reaction times. If you're young, you can be quicker both physically and mentally. Now, unfortunately, the second criteria, youth, I don't quite tick that box, as you can probably tell from the video. On the first criteria, being good at chess, for a club player, I'm pretty experienced. I recently became a national master. A couple of years ago, I jointly won the British over 50s championship. During the pandemic, I played thousands of Blitz games, and I found that what I lacked in youth, I tried to make up with cunning and a few techniques which we'll go through in this video series. I also put down in a book, Better Chess Faster, available on Amazon, a lot of ideas on Blitz, which is one chapter, and also classical thinking techniques, avoiding blunders, things like that. So essentially this video series is the Blitz chapter of that book, and we will dive into it now. So for this video series, there'll be 8 videos, and the main points we'll cover are on this slide here. I'll assume that our goal is to win more. Sure, you can play Blitz for fun. It can be fun, but it's even more fun in my experience if you win a few more games. We're going to focus almost exclusively on online games. That's where most games are played these days. It's very efficient and convenient to play games online. Key ideas listed. One or two of these are quite basic, but for the more technical ones, we'll have separate videos. So first one, play somewhere without distractions and a good internet. I mean, sure, you can play on the Wi-Fi on a train that's moving through tunnels. I've done that, and yeah, you'll win some games, but you'll also lose a few because you get disconnected, right? So try and play without distractions and with a solid internet connection. The second one, adjust your settings to enable pre-moves and auto promotion to queen. So there are certain settings you can adjust on your chess.com or Lichess account, and they can make it possible to use pre-moves, which we'll go into later, and also just save you the odd second or so. Almost always you want to promote to a queen, so why not make that decision automatic. Find a speed of play that you like and stick with it. So a lot of the time we'll be focused on 3 minutes, which is pretty much the fastest you can play Blitz. But many players will want to play a little more slowly, and if you're a little bit older or less experienced at chess, then it makes sense to play more slowly. So add an increment on, make it 3 minutes plus 2 seconds, play longer, 5 minutes. Or to be honest, playing say a 10-minute game or a 10-minute game with a small increment makes sense as well. Sure, it may not technically be called Blitz, but many of the techniques we're going to look at here will also help you in those games. Have a baseline plan for how you'll use your time. So the faster you're playing, the more it makes sense to have some kind of plan of how typically you would want to use your time. So it doesn't mean you'd always use it that way, but if you've got, say, 3 minutes, as we'll look at in a second, then you can divide up that 3 minutes as to how you would typically spend, say, time in the opening, middle game, and end game. Learn to pre-move. So pre-move can be very confusing for those that aren't familiar. Essentially, you're saying, I'm going to make a move before I even know what my opponent's move is, and that will save me some time. It also involves some risk, and we'll look at when and how you can pre-move it in a separate video. Practice basic checkmates. I mean, I'm rated over 2100, I think, still just. And I've been that rating for many years, but only in the last couple of years did I really learn how to win with king and queen against king in an efficient manner. And we'll look at how you can do that. Also, king and rook against king can waste a lot of seconds if you're not really familiar with a technique. Openings, I mean, plenty of flexibility here. Essentially, you can play pretty much anything at Blitz, but there are some openings that do particularly well, and we'll have a separate video looking at those and how you can identify them. Review your games afterwards. So this is common advice for pretty much all forms of the game, and I would argue it applies to Blitz. So after you play the game, review your game. I find there's loads of points you can learn from such a review, and it can help your general chess as well as your Blitz chess. So that's the main points. On this video, we're in the introduction, but essentially the more technical points we've just looked at there, those are the next 7 videos that we'll also look at. And for the remainder of this video, we're going to look at some background stats on Blitz games. So firstly, we look at, well, how many games do you lose on time? It's not obvious, right? I pulled some data from 3 different tournaments, each with 400, 500 games, and looked at how many of those were determined by time loss. So for example, the first row, 3-minute plus 2-second increment games, 413 games, 57 of those were lost on time, which represents 14% of the games. If you allow more time, then the percentage is lower, right? And particularly increment. But if you reduce the time, so 5 minutes increases the time loss to 20%, 3 minutes 26%. Now sure, not all of those games will have been 100% due to time loss, in the sense that one player was maybe completely lost anyway and happened to lose on time before they got checkmated. But it just gives you an indication that the faster you're playing, the more likely it is that you're going to have time as a relevant factor. And if you pull the stats on bullet games, 1-minute games, then you'll find that half or more of the games are determined by time. So how relevant is time loss is one factor. The other factor is, well, how many moves do you have to play in a Blitz game? It's not obvious, right? I pulled similar data, 100 game samples for each of 3 different formats, different speeds, and this chart shows that data. So each coloured bar represents a different time limit. So for example, the 3-minute plus 2-second games are the black bars, the 3-minute plus no increment are the shaded bars. And I mean, the pattern's fairly similar. If you look at the highest bars, then we see that 31 moves to 40 moves, that is where the greater percentage of games lie. So 25% of games, if you look at the vertical axis, pretty much that's where 3-minute plus 2 seconds falls. And for 5-minute games, then that's actually a touch over 30% of the games will complete in that window, and very slightly less than that for the 3-minute games. You can also look at this data cumulatively, and that's what we do on the next slide. And here, if we take the 41 to 50 band in particular, we'll see that pretty much 80% of games will be over by the end of that move band. So if you were to allow in your planning for making 50 moves, then 80% of the time you would be okay, but 20% of the time, well, you'd run out of time. So when we look at the time plan on the next slide, you can see that we have down the left hand side opening, early middle game, late middle game, early end game, late end game. These are all 10 move bands, and In the next column, there's a suggested speed. So these are designed to hit a 3-minute no increment game. If you were playing a slower game, then you could allow a little bit more, right? But directionally, what I'm arguing is that it makes sense to play the opening very quickly. 1 second per move is pretty ambitious, and very few players actually achieve that, which we'll see in a later video. But directionally, it's not a bad thing to aim for. Typically, you'll know a few opening moves, concrete moves, and you may well also know some typical ideas, so it makes sense to try and play the opening fairly quickly. Early middle game, things may be getting more complicated. There's still plenty of pieces on the board, critical decisions to make. So here, it makes sense to invest a little bit more time, 5 seconds per move on average, I'm suggesting here. And similarly in the late middle game, 5 seconds per move. But as pieces tend to get exchanged, things get maybe a little clearer as to who's winning. Then 3 seconds per move, you can probably speed up a little bit. And finally, in the late endgame section, then we have what may sometimes be a mopping up exercise, fewer pieces on the board. Maybe you're even just checkmating with king and queen against king. And here we're aiming to also play very, very quickly, typically. And then, because we've only allowed for 50 moves, we've got a little bit of contingency there, 30 seconds, in case the game goes on a bit longer. Or you could also use it for tricky decisions earlier on. But then you're taking a little bit of a risk that you might run on time. That's the decision point, really, in Blitz. So that's the introductory video. Please post any comments or queries. If you like the videos, please subscribe to the channel. And if you really like the videos, you might want to consider buying my book, Better Chess Faster, which you can get on Amazon. So thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the next video.